Yeah, let's talk about the Bundesliga, and we have to start with a never-ending story. It feels like this is the team in black and yellow, and this team black and yellow did exactly what most of us expected they would do. They would shine against Sporting midweek, and what the heck was that against Bochum? Um, this is about as depressing as it gets, Stefan. Like they had such a wonderful performance against Sporting. Everything clicked for them. Everything seemed to go well. And then this Bochum team, who I thought they were excellent. They did exactly the things that you need to do against Dortmund, and they were playing at home. And it's such a wonderful facility as well. And then they sing that they do the song with I forgot the name of the artist, the Bochum song, right? Which is such a great anthem to the city of Bochum and the club of Bochum, and then you get goosebumps from that, and then they go out in the field, and this club that has really struggled, Dieter Hecking, really put together a perfect match plan. Masuros was excellent. I actually think he should have had a hat trick. He had so many chances to score a third. Like this 2-0 result, I actually made look Dortmund better than what their performance was. I know that their XG was quite high. The XG was, I think, almost 3-3. But there was a couple headers in there where I really thought the XG overcalculated what the actual chance looked like, or maybe it just didn't look as dangerous live than it really was. XG of course is oft calculated from where the chance was produced, how high the probability is to score from that opportunity, and then of course AWS that the Bundesliga uses. They throw in a bunch of other parameters, like is there another player close by, where's the goalkeeper, and all that sort of thing. That's why XG with the Bundesliga sometimes looks different than other models, right? But, I thought that both times, Guirassy was in a great position, but the crosses were actually really quite hard to get on goal. So, I thought the XG was a little high for Dortmund. I thought it was bang on for Bochum. They could have probably scored 3.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing is I thought Gregor Kobel was actually quite clumsy for the first goal. His positioning was just a wee bit out of the way, and that ball coming across the goalmouth. I've just watched the highlights back there before we started recording, so once again I'll look at it, and he's maybe too far to the right of his goal than he should be. So the cross comes in from left. It's a cutback almost. It rolls across the 6-yard box, and it basically gets to the back post where Svensson is, and it just kind of gets bumped. At that point, it's already going into the net, so there's not much he can do about it. And I just feel like if Kobel wasn't so almost on the byline, he could have maybe stuck a leg out and stopped it going across the goalmouth. But having said that, I don't really feel like I can really criticise him too much, because he probably saved Dortmund from 2 goals at least in the second half with some big saves, big one-on-one saves. Yeah, do you know, it was such a kind of typical Dortmund performance away from home. In the previous show, we talked about the chance of this being an upset for Dortmund. Even if I don't even know if you can call it an upset really, since Dortmund have obviously been so poor away from home for so long now. You have to kind of wonder whether this is a game in which Bochum were actually maybe not favourites to win it, but favourites to take something from it. And yeah, sure enough, they just went toe to toe with Dortmund, and they were happy to do so. And it was a game in which they played the kind of perfect counter-attacking style. Obviously, they score a goal very quickly. And then I actually have on my phone goal alerts for most of the Bundesliga games, scores, just so I keep an eye on them as they're coming in. I was watching the Dortmund game. The first goal goes in. I walk from my living room to my kitchen to stick the kettle on to make a cup of tea. And I'm literally posting on Blue Sky about the first goal. And then the goal report, a goal flash comes up for the second. It's like, how the hell has that happened so quickly? And sure enough, like a minute later, Niklas Sule basically sets them off to score a second. There's a few things I think went wrong for Dortmund in this game. Number one, their away form just remains absolutely atrocious. We've talked about it a lot. We've kind of went through it time and time again about the way they set up, the way they can't see. They're incapable of holding on to possession. They're incapable of dominating a game. They're incapable of controlling a match. And when they go away from home and they're tasked with basically pitching up on the 20-yard line and almost like harassing a goalmouth, like, an invading army, like, sieging down a castle. They're incapable of doing that without getting hit on the break. And it's not hard to see, because that first goal, Emre Can just completely goes walkies and leaves a gap in defence that poor Marcel Sabitzer is left kind of chasing the runner. And then, of course, the second goal was just a huge mistake from Niklas Sule. But, Kuto, I think, came on in the second half and made a similar mistake. And, there's a whole argument you can make about the psychology of these Dortmund players right now, and the fact that their confidence is rock bottom, and maybe that's why guys like Kuto are making these stupid mistakes. Or you could just argue that guys like Emre Can and Niklas Sule just aren't good enough. It's as plain and as simple as that. At times, we were actually having this discussion with some colleagues about Emre Can during the Sporting game, I believe, and we were discussing Chan's role in the Dortmund team, and the point I made was that the bizarre thing about Can at Dortmund is that he's never actually been a starting key player at any point in his career until he moved to Dortmund. He obviously came through in the Bundesliga, where he was a young, impressive player. He then moved straight to Liverpool, if I'm not mistaken. Where
I think he was at Leverkusen.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He came through the Bundesliga. Yeah. He came through the Bundesliga first, and then off to Leverkusen.
He's a Bayern product.
Yeah,
he's Frankfurt, then Bayern. But he played mostly at. Let me get this right. But yeah, I think you're totally right. Hold on, I have his stats. He was in the Bayern academy.
Yeah, Bayern, and then Frankfurt, and Leverkusen. It's off the top of my head. Yeah. Then we'll say Liverpool, Juventus, and then Dortmund, if my memory serves me right.
I think that's almost right.
Yeah. Well, whichever
your point stands either way.
Yeah, whichever combination it is, the fact is he was never first team player at Liverpool. He was never first team player at Bayern. Never first team player at Juventus. He then just drops into this Dortmund team, and for some reason, despite his entire career passing by without him ever being a player that any of these clubs decided was reliable enough to be a starter, he's not only a starter for Dortmund, but he's a starter in the wrong position. And multiple head coaches, one after the other, whether it's Terzic, whether it's Sahin, whether it's and now Kovac, they all seem to think he's the next coming of Mats Hummels, and he's this outstanding central defender, and he makes mistakes time and time again. It drives me absolutely insane. I'm not saying that every game's a mistake, but I was thinking about this actually when I was walking my dog today, because I was obviously just trying to think about things we can talk about in the show. And I was trying to think about Emre Can. I was like, right, how do I be fair to the guy? Because I don't want to just rant and sound like some angry person on the internet. And the thing is, he might have some games as a defender for Dortmund where he's not the worst player on the pitch, and maybe he puts in a passable performance. But I think I can honestly say in my heart, I've never watched Dortmund and thought Emre Can won them that game, or Emre Can stopped them from losing that game. And I know it's a lot harder for defenders to get the limelight in these matches, but there were, Mats Hummels in his prime won points for Dortmund. He won them games of football. He made sure they didn't lose matches, they didn't drop points. I've never once watched Dortmund with Emre Can in his team and thought, that guy just rescued them all 3 points, or that guy rescued them from defeat. And so, I'm really struggling to understand why he's in this team at all. And then you can add to that Niklas Sule, who I thought was pretty terrible. And my final point as well, actually, and I know I've been ranting for about 10 minutes here, is that I thought it was really interesting that Guirassy missed two really obvious chances in the first half, which he should have scored, I thought. And I just checked there, and Dortmund haven't won a game in 2025 yet in which Guirassy didn't score. So it's I think his kind of really his rich vein of form in 2025 has kind of maybe masked a lot of the issues. He obviously just kind of really kicked on when Nuri Sahin left, and obviously the interim head coach was in charge for a couple of games, scored against Bremen, scores against Heidenheim, scores in the Champions League. But I think he's masked a lot of the kind of problems in that forward line. And when he missed his chances in this game, I think it was clear that Dortmund were in trouble, because there's just no one in this team who seems to be capable of stepping up and scoring the goals when he doesn't. Rant over.
Well, I just include two fact checks here. So, first of all, the Bochum song is Herbert Grönemeyer. That's important. That's the most important fact check here. Don't want to get this wrong, because he's a legendary German singer. The second one is, Emre Can is born and raised in Frankfurt. And he's joined Bayern Munich's U17 in 2009. I'm going here with this. So hang on a moment. He then joined Leverkusen in 2013 for 5 million euros. Then was there for 1 season and joined Liverpool for 12 million euros. This was under Klopp. He then, of course, left Liverpool on a free transfer because he was looking for more minutes, right? That was the big story. It didn't get that at Juventus either, and then he joined Dortmund on loan, and then was signed permanently the year after. This is in 2020 for 25 million euros. Now, there is one parallel between why he ended up going to Bayern in the youth setup and then ended up going to Dortmund, and that parallel is Matthias Sammer. Matthias Sammer is obsessed with Emre Can. And I remember when this was before Emre Can was even with the senior team at Bayern Munich, when he started getting his minutes there, right? Matthias Sammer was on German TV and they asked him, who's going to be the next Sami Khedira? Who's going to be the next big player in midfield? And Matthias Sammer said, it's going to be Emre Can. He's a natural leader. He's the player that like people in that youth setup look up to. He's going to be the next big star for Germany in midfield. And that's parallel, right? That's why Emre Can now plays at Borussia Dortmund. That's why he has such a big role at Borussia Dortmund. That's why he's probably the captain at Borussia Dortmund, is because Matthias Sammer loves the player. I do think I can see why that is the case. I think there are certain attributes that Matthias Sammer sees in Emre Can that remind him of himself, right? We all know what kind of a fiery player Matthias Sammer was, and how dedicated and he was to the game, and how hard he worked, right? And one of the reasons why Matthias Sammer isn't in a full-time role at the moment is because he got really sick during his time at Bayern Munich, right? And that's why he works in a consultancy role only at Dortmund and isn't getting pushed into more there. But I do think that a lot of that comes from there. And I think there is a lot of attributes that people that are working in the game like about Emre Can. That doesn't necessarily mean he's the solution for what's going on, right? I mean, we were in the Substack chat and people were saying, oh my God, look at what the stop that Emre Can did here. Or look how he paced down this attacking player. I'm like, we're celebrating Emre Can for doing his job. You know what I mean? Like, this is not like some last second ditch tackle, Mats Hummels like tackle that like only Mats Hummels could do and everyone else would get off with a red card, right? Like, that's the thing. I think there's a lot of attributes that football people like, but they get kind of blinded by it and overlooks a certain amount of the shortcomings. And I think too, this is the other aspect, and you kind of mentioned it. Niklas Sule is right back. I don't know why anyone thought that would be a good idea, right? I understand that. He has this reputation for being extremely fast, but I'm not sure that's still there. There's been so many injuries, his fitness concern. He worked in the off season. He looked a lot better coming into the summer break. Mind you, we have seen that before. Word is he's finally decided that lifting weights is a good idea. I mean, how you can go through your entire career without doing some sort of body work aside from training is beyond me. I was a varsity athlete in the early 2000s, Stefan, and we had to do weight training on top of our normal training regime then. This is not a new scientific breakthrough that you have to do weight training on top of. I'm not saying bulk up, but it is really important to work your core, etc. And he, that was the big issue at Bayern. He refuses to do it. And he's finally decided that this is something that he wants to do. But I don't understand. Like, I praise Kovac for putting the right players at the right positions for the Sporting game and how it worked. And then you look at this lineup and you see Niklas Sule pop up as a right back, and you just wonder, like, why did anyone think that was a good idea? That is something that I just don't understand.
Well, obviously they were missing Rierson because he was obviously suspended with that red card, which I know.
But you signed this Brazilian guy for lots of money from Man City.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first things first, his red card in the previous game was not a red card. It was an absolute nonsense call. And yeah, you're right. They've got Kutu, and I've got no idea. I did mention in the group chat, in the subscriber chat, actually, before the game kicked off, that it was really quite telling that Kovac opted for Niklas Sule over Kutu. And if I want to be kind to Kovac, I can maybe say, look, he's already been in the job for a week. He doesn't know these players personally. He hasn't had a chance to evaluate them himself. He's maybe falling back on what the Dortmund staff are saying. And clearly, Emre Can has plenty of fans at Dortmund, because if he didn't, he would have been long gone. And maybe the same for Niklas Sule. So maybe Kovac has said, right, well, I don't know any better, so I'll stick with these guys for the time being. I think in both cases, they're both players who obviously have, or at least had, very obvious physical attributes, which on paper made them very good players. Emre Can has always been a very good passer of the ball. He's always been very strong. He's always been very fast. He's always been quite good at dribbling with the ball. So on paper, he has all the tools to be a great player, but he's never been a great player. And he obviously has these kind of hiccups where he loses the ball, or he's slow on the turn, or he's easy to manipulate on and off the ball. And it constantly causes problems for Dortmund. And, you know, that first goal against Bochum was a perfect example of it, where he just doesn't know where to be. Niklas Sule is another example of that as well, I think, where he's obviously this huge guy. We joked about it on the previous show about how big he is and how fast he is. I think Dortmund are just basically counting down the days until they can basically get rid of him this summer, to be perfectly honest with you.
So much potential, all just thrown away. It's infuriating when you think about Sule and what he could have been.
I know, but like if you speak to any head coach or any coach at any level of football, they'll tell you that like 90% of the best players at youth level don't make it it's not really, some of them are because of injury, some of them because of circumstance, but 99% of the time it's because of attitude or personality.
And that
makes a difference between top class players and just guys who were good at high school and never quite made it. It's the same in any sport, really. I'm not saying that Emre Can and Niklas Sule are those guys, but there's then a different tier once you become a professional level, which differentiates the very top from just good players on paper. But I don't know. I honestly have struggled with Emre Can's entire time at Dortmund. I put him in the same bracket as guys like Torgan Hazard, Nico Schulz, that kind of long list of kind of expensive signings that Dortmund made over the years that haven't really quite worked out. They're just kind of expensive players in their mid-20s who were supposed to offer some degree of legitimacy or seniority alongside the younger players, and it just hasn't worked out. Neither Sule. He's the exact same situation for me, and I think they have to move on with both of them. But going back to the January window, we were saying before the end of 2024, Dortmund have to sign like 2 or 3 defenders in January, and they didn't do anything of the sort. So,
they signed Svensson. He's good.
Yeah, Svensson.
I actually think he's a good signing.
And I do think it's worth noting here because, like we say, defenders don't often get the limelight. I think this game really highlights how important Ryerson is to Dortmund. I think pound for pound, he might honestly be one of their most important players this season. I know he doesn't score the goal, I know he doesn't create the chances, but if there's one player who I don't think's ever let me down when I watch Dortmund and think this guy's had an absolute stinker, Ryerson's probably one of the few players in that Dortmund team who I think has gone game to game without ever really put in a terrible performance, which I know that's a difficult thing to say since he got sent off in the last game, but like I said, I just don't think that was a red card, to be perfectly honest. Our second yellow led to red cards, so Dortmund are a mess. Bochum have done well. The world will keep on spinning because that just seems to be the way things are in the Bundesliga these days.
Ryerson and Svensson do well because they're Scandinavians, and you know this. I used to play youth hockey, and I spent a lot of time with Swedes and Finns. You can trust Scandinavians to get shit done. That's just how it is, Stefan. They'll never complain. They just get it done. I have a lot of respect for anyone that comes from up there. They're usually very hardworking, and Svensson is just the latest example, right? And Ryerson is another. No shortcomings there. I just think the whole thing with Emre Can is so fascinating because he's obviously doing something to get people with a lot of power to trust him. And it's not just the Dortmund. Julian Nagelsmann brought him in and probably threw away the Euros by playing him against Spain, right? And I think it's probably, put my finger on it, I think he has personality traits that make people trust him. He's the typical locker room guy with the big talk and the strong aura, and teammates love him, coaches love him, and it makes them oversee the deficits on the field, I think. And you get this in many situations across different sports, where you just look at the guy and like people wonder like, well, why does this guy have a career? And it's because the coaches love to have them around, and they see something, and then it blinds them towards the obvious deficits that exist. And like Nagelsmann hammered Can into that team, taking out Andrich against Spain because Emre Can is fast, and this is Kovac saying the same thing now. Oh, why is he playing centre back? Well, because of speed. I was like, yeah, he's really fast. That's great. But you also need to have all these other tools in your toolbox in order to be successful. Other than being fast, great in the dressing room. So, I mean, this is just the things. This is the kind of stuff that like is going to hurt Dortmund until they're going to completely clear house. I think it's gotten to a place now, and we mentioned this, where the only way you can fix this is by fixing everything. You just kind of need to clear house. And the problem is, of course, I put this on Blue Sky. I'm like, oh yeah, it's going to be all fine because they're going to play Club World Cup, and they're going to sell Bino Gittins for 100 million euros. And I put in brackets behind it, lol, because obviously I don't believe anyone is going to pay 100 million euros for Bino Gittins. But they do think that, right? Like, I mean, this is obviously something that they themselves have kind of leaked to the press, like, oh, we can always sell Gittins for 100 million euros. And so the books are going to be fine, right? I mean, like, this is how it is, right? I mean, financially, they're all okay. So nothing to worry and nothing to see here. We can just keep going the way it is.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there's just too many people at Dortmund who would happily finish 5th or 6th, and if they sell Gittins for 50, 60 million euros, then they'll chalk that up as a good season. And that's just the way Dortmund are these days.
Yeah.
And we can't expect them to be any better.
Yeah, I mean, I made this other joke that the Armin Laschet of German football, the failed chancellor candidate 4 years ago for the CDU, that's about as boring and average that they are right now. So maybe fitting, considering that the Hans-Joachim Watzke is a big Armin Laschet fan. So
yeah. Before we move on from Dortmund, just one final thing. I made a joke on social media this week saying Dortmund are now only 15 points in the relegation zone, and I'm really not entirely sure how much of a joke it is anymore. I wrote a piece a few weeks ago for the website saying how far will Dortmund fall, and I referenced Schalke, Hamburg, Werder Bremen, Hertha if you want. The Zweite Bundesliga is full of clubs who were once, title contenders, top 4 regulars, considered to be the richest clubs in Germany, or up there with the richest clubs in Germany. And before anyone knew what was happening, they were relegated and they were in an absolute, mess. And I'm just saying, I said this a few weeks ago,
yeah,
it'd be silly to think that Dortmund are immune to the things that, got Schalke, got Hamburg, got Brett. I know these were all different clubs with different circumstances, but we see this time and time again in German football, at least in the modern era. No club is too big to fail, and no club is too big to get relegated. And we're now 15 points off relegation. Let's see what happens in the coming weeks, see if that number gets bigger or smaller.
I mean, Matthias Sammer became coach at Borussia Dortmund because they were on the brink of getting relegated in 2001, I think it was, right? And of course, the story is also that the next year they won the German title. But also, they won the German title because they spent so much money on players that almost bankrupted them 2 years later. So, it always does start with one season where you miss the Champions League. That gets you into this cycle where you're trying to spend to get back into the Champions League, and if you don't get into it right away, then you're spending more, and then that gets you into financial turmoil. That's how Werder Bremen threw away all their cash reserves and almost went bankrupt during COVID. That's how Schalke got to where they are now. The other example is, of course, Hamburg SV. It all started with them chasing, European football and doing a very poor job. It is not out of the realm of possibility. I think no club is too big to fail. And as you said, there's plenty in German football where that can happen.